Thank you, James, and thank you, everyone. I was told to do a mic check. It's working. Good. Great to be moderating this panel on managing the challenges of mega constellations, and it's a good mixed panel we have here today with numerous skill sets across academia, technology, and policy and legal areas. And I've got a few good topics for us to get into. First up, I like to know a bit about my panelists and get a bit of colour, particularly so you can come and accost them after the panel ends. So I've got a bit of a concept for how each of them can intro each other, intro themselves using a tweet format. Keep it only 280 characters or less, i.e. short, and answer me these 4 questions. Who are you? Where are you from? Your company and geography. And what do you do? Easy one to start. What impact do you want to make on space industry? You can give a short plug on your organisation. That's important too, for number 3. And number 4, what will be the biggest benefit to humanity from space in the next 20 years? Melrose, can I start with you?
Okay.
You made eye contact.
I'm Dr. Melrose Brown. I'm a senior lecturer at UNSW Canberra Space, which is just over the hill here in Canberra. What's my second question?
What impact do you want to make on space industry?
Impact on the space industry, really driving the space sector forward through the people we develop through our programs, education programs, and also the research that we do.
Good. Now you can give a short plug for your organisation.
So UNSW Canberra Space, we've got 2 main research themes: intelligent on-orbit small satellite research, so we fly formations of satellites, and space domain awareness research. We've also got a number of education programs spanning undergraduate, postgraduate, and professional education. Is that good?
That's really good.
Yeah.
And what's the biggest benefit to humanity from space capability in the next 20 years?
I think the same benefits that we've already enjoyed. Creating knowledge, spreading that knowledge through the world. In the next 20 years, connecting more of the planet together, and then through things like James Webb Space Telescope and Square Kilometre Array, really understanding more about where we come from.
Awesome. Thank you, Melrose. Lynn, can I turn to you now?
Yes. Mic check.
You're on.
It's working. Got it. I don't tweet, so this is a really hard homework assignment, but I'll go for it. I'm Lynn McDonald. I am from Washington, just outside of Washington, D.C., and a recent transplant to Australia and a happy resident in Canberra. I'm the Azure Space Lead for Microsoft in Australia, and I'm leading a team of amazing engineers like Josh Fitzmaurice and others who are shaping our hyperscale cloud capabilities for the space industry. So focused on bringing the enabling technology for the industry.
And what impact do you personally want to make on the space industry?
I think accessibility, if I had to boil it down to one word, so I know I've got 280 characters, but I'll boil it, and I'm using them up, but if I boil it down to one word, that would be accessibility. So from a tech perspective, how do we make technology, compute, and connectivity accessible? From a people perspective, I'm also looking at it in terms of accessibility and looking at that through the lens of diversity and ensuring that I'm advocating for and supporting initiatives to create diversity to make the industry accessible to a broad range of talent.
And what's the biggest impact space capability will have on humanity in the next 20 years?
That's a tough one. So I'll go back to the Microsoft mission statement, which is to empower people to achieve more, and to do that through technology. So if I look at that from the perspective of the impact in space and what I see coming from that, I mean, really, we're focused on helping people achieve more through technology. I think, when we look at where we're headed from a space exploration perspective, the spin-off technologies that will come out of that, all of the technology that's going to come out of our exploration in space will be a tremendous benefit to humanity.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. Now, Melissa and Glen, Melrose and Lynn actually reached out to see what I'd be asking, so they already knew. But Glen, I've seen you on 1,000 panels over the last 15 years. Before when we only had the Australasian Satellite Forum, before space conferences were cool. So I'll go to you next. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
All right, so mic check. Yep. So Glen Tindall from EOS Space Systems. So I'm running the space systems business there at EOS today. So EOS is actually one of Australia's quite well-established space businesses. It's been in business for about 35 years, mostly doing space domain awareness as well as products on the ground. What was the third question?
Third question was give a plug.
Oh, that was a plug. Sorry, I'm ahead of the curve.
That's right.
Yeah.
What impact do you want to make?
Oh, the impact, yeah. So look, Australia at the moment is heavily reliant on overseas companies and governments to support our space industry. There's been a very clear statement of intent from the government that we should become not just a consumer of space services and products, but also a producer. So we want to be part of that journey and provide an increasing share of space services and products indigenously.
And benefit to humanity in the next 20 years? What's it going to be?
Yeah, this one's a toughie. So I think it's everything. So you can do a lot of things in space you can't do on the ground. You can get observational data, you can conduct science experiments, you can improve communication, security, navigation, all of the above. So what we're trying to do at EOS is be an enabler for that. So we want to provide space domain awareness so that we can responsibly use space and know what's going on. We want to provide a communications platform to make it easier for new applications to appear in space. So that's pretty much
Thank you,
it.
Glen. And Melissa, I looked up your profile on the Flinders University website, and there's a nice headshot of you there, and there's a little star on it, and it says media expert in it. So I figure you should be good to go and answer my 4 questions.
I trusted you. It's clearly the right thing to do, wasn't it? I will learn my lesson from now on. So, all right, I'll see if I can get this right. So I'm Melissa de Zwart. I'm from the Jeff Bleich Centre for the US Alliance at Flinders University. I am a lawyer. I'm not a scientist or an engineer, and I feel like I've spent my entire professional life sort of not apologising so much, but explaining that I'm not the lawyer that's come here to say, no, you can't do that thing. So what I am most keen about is facilitating, encouraging, supporting and developing a vibrant and excellent Australian space industry. And so what I feel I can bring to that is an understanding of how the regulatory environment shapes industry. So it doesn't matter how great your idea is, if the regulatory environment is not right, then it will either flourish or not flourish. So that's what I feel that I can bring. And I'm passionate about that. Now, what I think about space, I am one of these sort of weird people who actually thinks that humanity just does have this drive to explore and to go beyond and to do new things. And I think that the exploration of space is inevitable. I can say that because I'm not a scientist, so I don't have to justify it. I can just say I think that it's so. So, I think it's very important to, develop connections, all the things we've been talking about here. Who do we want to work with? How do we want to behave responsibly? How are we going to ensure that we can make space sustainable in all sorts of ways so we can continue to do that? Just making sure that we have the conversations, have the fora in which we can talk like adults, like responsible people, about what we want to do and how we're going to make that possible.
Awesome. And we'll look to explore some of that for the rest of this panel, which, if you've forgotten, was managing the challenge of mega constellations, which might beg the question, what is a mega constellation? Apparently, it's a satellite constellation that has several hundreds or thousands of satellites in it orbiting the Earth. And some rough data I grabbed was that the China Satellite Network Group has plans to launch 13,000 satellites. We've heard about Starlink a lot. They've got 12,000 approved, and I've asked to launch another 30,000. Project Cooper's got 3,000 approved, want to do another 5,000 on top of that. OneWeb's got 648, another 6,000 on top of that. There's a few thousand from Boeing in there now. Telesat's got a couple of thousand. Spire is probably a name we haven't heard of, doing 175. These are just comm satellites, and then there's all the Earth observation, ISR constellations being launched. it did make me wonder, and this is kind of discussion point number one, all these numbers about tens and thousands of hundreds of thousands of satellites. What does the customer get from all these constellations? What can we expect Jane Citizen to care about with respect to all these satellites? And if we can have a bit of a discussion starting from the consumer and maybe move through business, government, military, what can customers expect from mega constellations as we go forward? I might start with you, Lynn.
So I think at the crux of it, it's about digital transformation. Across the customer set, whether it is commercial, government, defense, and everyday citizen, it really is all about digital transformation. So transforming the way that we connect, so that we can do things fast through compute, we can do things smart. We're in an incredibly data-driven environment. It is going to exponentially increase as we see these mega constellations explode. And so it really is driving us, or about to propel us forward into this opportunity to digitally transform really across our lives. From how we've all kind of been thrust into this incredibly virtual world over the last couple of years. So how we do education, how we operate in our work lives has all been driven to this very virtual world. So having the ability to connect, to be able to connect at speed, at capacity, and to do that across a number of environments, the ability to connect from in the urban environment to the remote environment, I think is really significant. So I've been looking at it from the perspective of the digital transformation that is coming, and that is, again, I kind of boil that down to doing things fast, smart, and connected. So fast through compute, smart through the data sciences, artificial intelligence, machine learning. How are we going to manage all of this data in the environment that's being driven from the mega constellations, and just really all space capabilities, and the ability to connect seamlessly in any environment. So when you look at business and what is coming, what is happening and about to happen from a digital transformation perspective, and it will be absolutely facilitated through the mega constellations, I think is really interesting to consider for business to be able to create those high capacity, low latency environments for business operations, whether you're at your operational headquarters for a business, take the mining industry, defense industries, being able to expand your operations to some of the most remote areas and do that in a seamlessly connected environment. So I think that we've got some really interesting connectivity scenarios that are coming through the mega constellation providers and capabilities. But I think what we need to think about is, what does that connectivity drive?
So thinking about that, Glen, does that mean it's almost irrelevant what the bearer is to the customer? Do they care about mega constellations?
No, seriously, the customer doesn't care. The customer wants connectivity. And so, those constellations we've described, most of those were really communications networks. Look, I'm going to be a bit controversial, and at risk of making an enemy of the richest man in the world, I don't believe in the business case. I've been unable to close it, and nobody's been able to convince me otherwise thus far. I don't see how you can spend $10+ billion on something that depreciates at 20% per year and sell $50 a month connections. I just don't see how it can be done. And there might be a glide path to get there, but it's been far from demonstrated yet. So I think the consumer bandwidth story isn't really a good one. I think if there's another application out there, and it might be, what always happens with people that build big constellations is they say, we're going to do consumer. Consumer's awesome. We're here to serve the world. And then after a few years, they go, consumer's not that flash margins. What's really good is oil and gas. Those guys really need our bandwidth, and we need government. And they'll start to try to diversify because they realise the business cases don't close. So I think I can already detect the beginnings of that starting to happen with some of these mega constellations. But my pet theory, and I apologise if you've already heard this, is I think the self-driving car story works. I think $50 a month for consumer broadband, you can't make a business out of it. But if it's $500, now you don't need a driver for your vehicle, your truck delivering stuff, that's a business that makes sense. So I have a feeling that that's what we need is a new application to make all these business cases close. Now, that's not to say we need 327,000 CubeSats to do this. Potentially, we could do it with a lot less. Yeah.
Yeah. So Melrose, on the academic side of things, are you a customer of mega constellations? Does it make a difference to you?
I guess it depends. So, we've spoken about connectivity and also about exploration. Mega constellations give you that opportunity to know more faster with better accuracy to more places. So certainly in that education space, and it's something that Australia probably needs to tackle if we want to really use space to lift everyone up, is how do we get all of this information that we generate through our science or technology and spread that throughout the rest of the country. We've found that laying cables is a really hard thing to do to try and get that knowledge around the country. So yeah, possibly there's a mechanism for that. But I think we do need to think carefully about what these opportunities are and make sure they're sustainable. And I would I don't really know the ins and outs of the economic case, but I would echo the previous comments that there's a lot of examples of constellations going out of business and not a lot of examples of them being successful. So I think we need to really work on what we really need them for, and a lot of that purpose that Deloitte spoke about yesterday to really drive the use case and the value proposition forward.
And Melissa, is there a thing there about how we communicate that as the space industry? I mean, Richard Miles talked about it as well. How are we communicating what we're doing here to a wider audience to get everyone on board? I liked how Paul Scully-Powell put it this morning, talking about the space internet. I think that's something everyone can get behind. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, but I think particularly in a country like Australia, I mean, we have, we heard from the Minister this morning about how large, her electorate is. I mean, one of the issues that we have in Australia is these vast areas and, properties that do rely on Internet of Things connectivity for real human safety issues. So, instead of having to spend a couple of weeks riding around checking whether the dam levels are full or not, it's much safer to be able to do that through an IoT system. And I'm just sort of listening to the question about the business case, and it's true, but it's also exactly how the internet, the commercialisation of the internet itself started. I mean, what the academics who started it thought that it was going to be used for, and then everybody thought it was just going to be used for gaming and porn. Industry does go through those cycles. I mean, how we communicate it to the public is really, I think, about issues to do with, benefit to the average person. I did read a really interesting review of the Starlink connectivity a couple of weeks ago, and the reviewer was shelling out the I think it was nearly $100 a month by the time he the conversion rate, and was questioning himself. Do I really need this? And he said, well, I'm sitting out here, in the middle of nowhere. I've got high-speed internet. I can still work from here. Everything's great. Those sorts of stories resonate with people. And I think you can also use them to resonate for things like, remote area safety. If you're, engaged in working in a national forest, you're on your own. Those sorts of stories resonate with us as Australians because we know how dangerous it is to be working remotely. So I think we'll find the stories.
So is government going to be a customer of commercial constellations, or do they need their own?
Well, I think, again, Defence is certainly looking at deployable constellations, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. And there are new uses being developed every day. But yeah, government is always going to be a major customer for space.
Yeah, I think on the, managing the country we live in, the climate change issue, that resiliency piece, there is a big argument there that, goes a little bit beyond just what is an individual willing to pay for. But the internet piece is interesting because, who's paid for the internet? It's the advertisers. And now we've got a disinformation problem because the advertisers kind of paid for it. So we do, we have an opportunity here to really shape what this looks like and grab hold of it and make sure we've got a genuine benefit for us, or we can just let it happen and kind of be at the mercy of whatever direction it goes in.
Could I just make the observation that there's a lot of engineers in the room, and I was an engineer, but I think I got kicked out some time ago for poor performance. But we spend a lot of time thinking about the boxes, about the what, but not the how or why. We don't spend enough time thinking about the applications. And when I look at every technology that's being deployed, the inventors think it's going to be used for X, and instead it gets used for Y. And I think this is what Melissa was saying. Yeah. And I think the more we think about the applications and the uses, that's going to actually provide a better outcome than I think it's what Melrose is saying too, right? It's going to provide a better outcome than thinking about the boxes, which is, we all tend to, it's very concrete, we like that. But, that'd be my sort of thought.
I think Mike Pizzullo said yesterday, idealism with a healthy dose of realism with respect to our space endeavours. And you brought a bit of that there for us, Melrose. And it does lead to my next discussion point. There's numerous discussions going on about the effect that these mega constellations are having on the space environment. From this article in Nature in May, the rapid development of mega constellations risks multiple tragedies of the commons, including tragedies to ground-based astronomy, Earth orbit, and Earth's upper atmosphere. And I did note that there are 26 re-entries predicted to happen in December. Most of those are Starlink satellites. Then there's some stat about that's releasing more aluminium into the atmosphere than anything ever before, and that's just kind of in the next month. So mega constellations are already causing problems with our use of the space environment, and are there more that we're seeing in the future? And do we have any solutions? Should I start with the lawyer?
Oh, look.
Go on. You are nodding vigorously.
Yeah. Well, if you don't follow Jonathan McDowell on Twitter, who's the astrophysicist at Harvard, then I strongly suggest that you do, because he was already this morning, I think there were 6 Starlink satellites that are degrading much faster than they expected. Again, this is human behaviour, and I think, we talk about, and it's been mentioned a few times over the last day and a half, space as a commons. Now, is space a global commons? We know that we had the statement from the US, executive statement last year, which was that they do not recognise space as a global commons. And so these are discussions that we need to have. So here we are, as you said, the engineers are out there doing the thing, and the regulators are still back here going, oh, space is a global, or is it a global? Oh, no, I'm not really sure. Now, it's not just semantics, because it's about how we regulate that environment. So while we sit and worry about whether it's a global commons or not, this is already happening. So we know that, LEO is the sort of hot property in space. We know that you can't have real estate in space. We know that that's what international law tells us. It's about, what happened with the race to GEO. We're experiencing it now. And, everybody needs to get up there quickly before that it's congested. It's just going to cause problems with, launch. It's going to cause problems with whether there's enough area to deploy. It's going to cause problems already, is it cyber secure? And, I can go on, because I'm a lawyer, I can tell you all the problems endlessly. But how are we going to manage it in a responsible way? Interesting thing, of course, with LEO is that it's regulated via the radio frequency spectrum. So you're dealing with the ITU and then with your domestic body. So in Australia, it's the ACMA. Really, really good regulators who understand how to regulate the spectrum. So you're in essence going to be forcing spectrum management to do a whole lot of heavy lifting about things like debris. So again, instead of shying away from it and going, oh, aluminium and space debris and is it a commons, we need to facilitate, interagency discussions, intergovernmental discussions about how we are going to behave responsibly in space. We've seen UN COPUOS take a bit of a step forward recently. We need to get better at having these international discussions and then get better at supporting our domestic agencies to do the regulation. And I think another issue that, the problem with, and Starlink adjusted to take account of the interference with astronomy problem, the reflection problem, and I don't know if the Nature article picked it up as well, this is something that I hadn't thought about, is just the issue of the visual environment, and particularly for Indigenous and First Nations people about how they relate to the night sky. So we've got a lot of work to do. Let's not shy away from doing, but we've got a lot of work to do to understand what we're going to do if we are going to allow very heavy use of the LEO environment, how we're going to do it responsibly, and how much are we going to license people to be involved there.
So Melrose, you do space domain awareness as your research topic. What are you seeing?
So
What's been changing?
What we are practically seeing is we launched our M2 formation satellite mission a couple of months ago. Every single week, a Starlink satellite manoeuvres out of our way. And they're really good about it. We get a CDM and they automatically get that and they move. But that's a tiny fraction of the number of satellites that are planned to be launched. Currently, we've got tens or hundreds of thousands of satellites on the books. And the incentive is to build these really, really quickly and launch them really, really quickly so you can get hold of that spectrum. If you've got tens or hundreds of thousands of satellites that are all maneuvering, and we've got this exquisite space domain awareness capability, and you can all move around, we can manage that. We can stop them from crashing into each other. But if we launch tens or hundreds of thousands of satellites and they stop working, or they never work when they're deployed, or as we've seen with like a retired NOAA satellite or a Chinese one that was a couple of years old, just randomly blowing up because they have not, that happens, then we've got a very serious problem to deal with that literally can't be solved. And then the other issue we need to think about is what are we using these satellites for? So if it's purely commercial, it's domestic, then okay, it's a commercial satellite. Once we get into this, heavy dual use aspect, we've already seen that there's been an anti-satellite test, not the first one. We saw India had one a few years ago. There wasn't a very strong response from the community, which suggests people are maybe keeping this in their back pocket as an option. So if you've now got lots of satellites that are now targets, then very quickly we can find ourselves in a situation that no one could have predicted, right? So what we need are incentives to do the right thing. Regulation will never keep up with technology, like trying to get people to agree. Trying to get us 4 people to agree would be hard enough, not on the international stage. So how can we incentivize our launch service providers, our satellite developers, our users, the people paying for this, to encourage better behavior and try to dissuade less useful behavior? I think that's where it's at. More carrots to do good things rather than trying to develop a stick that will get watered down to maybe a pool noodle at best.
At the risk of oversimplifying, so look, all satellites have got a little flag on them. They belong to a country. When I think about the COP26 protocol, right? So it's a little bit the similar situation. There's a tragedy of the commons going on. There's governments that have responsibilities and some level of control over commercial entities. Probably that's a similar process we need to be looking at in terms of responsible use of space. Look, having some nations go and file massive constellations where there's no plans to deorbit them and so forth, that's obviously detrimental. But on the other hand, we did see Australia doing the right thing. Our constellation in the US, the FCC, went to us and said, show us how you're going to deorbit and you're not going to be dropping heavy things on people's heads. So we showed them that. So we are seeing some positive dynamic there where responsible users, responsible nations are encouraging, in fact, mandating use there. So maybe it's an incremental approach. But
yeah, it is. It's got a lag, right? So we've launched lots of things that don't have propulsion.
Yep.
And that's okay, because there's not a lot of things in space, but they're going to be up there for a while. So when there are lots of things in space, they're still there. So, we're trying to find ways and methods of doing this whole space domain awareness and space traffic management piece. But it's all kind of built on quite old ways of thinking about, command and control. A lot of the people working in the policy and regulation area kind of have this vision that we know exactly what's going on in space and when things are going to get close to us. But if you ask 5 different space domain awareness providers where things are going to be, you're going to get 5 different answers. There is no solution to a maneuver to avoid a collision. You can screen for those, but there's no system where if someone zigs to get out of the way of one collision and someone else zags to get out of the way of another, whether that actually causes an issue. We've not sought to solve that on a global scale. And we've certainly not tried to think about how do we engage with China and Russia on this, because if we leave them out of the story, then we're solving this part of the problem, and it's the bit you're not looking at that is going to probably bite you.
So, Lynn, what should corporations be more proactive? Is it irresponsible? And maybe a bit controversial to answer in the affirmative. Is it irresponsible for these companies to be launching so many satellites? I feel like history is repeating with industrialization. Just destroying everything behind it, and then we try and fix it after.
Yeah.
Can we be more proactive this time?
Right. I definitely think there's a need for government and industry to come together in how these mega constellations are managed. To your point, Melissa, we're admiring the problem, and the engineers they're not going to pause. I've heard a couple conversations about kind of the ifs about the mega constellations, and it's like now it's happening right now. What we don't have is, the regulatory framework is going to lag, but there's some really practical aspects that need to be resolved soon. Space traffic management is a critical function, and at least from a U.S. perspective, I think that there was a space policy directive that came down in 2018, where space traffic management would transition over to Department of Commerce, and that's just lagged, and so we haven't really gotten to resolution in terms of congressional action to move that forward, to resource it. So here we have this hesitance in an incredibly critical activity and a necessary activity, while the capability is going on orbit. So I do think that, the discussion on space is the global commons. It is a global community in space, and we have to, it can't be just the US that leads that activity. It has to be an international engagement. Government and industry have to work together in that, but wherever the regulatory framework goes, there's a very practical element to we've got to be able to manage this activity in an already incredibly congested environment.
Thinking back to what Mike Pizzullo was talking about yesterday, say the business case closes, the space internet. Is there enough being done, do you think, on the cybersecurity front? These are new nodes on our network that are just, who knows?
No.
No?
No.
Interesting. That's tomorrow's problem, is it? Or?
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, it's things that are being thought about, but it's kind of recognised in that there's plenty of things out there to say, yeah, it's pretty hard to protect, especially these small satellites, because they've only got small computers on them, and that's where some of this AI-enabled technology can come into play to not necessarily defend them, but to at least identify that they're being attacked. But you really need to look at that whole of system approach, and where are the weak links. If you go really hard in the cyber stuff before we've got anything in orbit, though, then it's going to be really hard to develop systems and things like that.
But I think that's the point, isn't it? So you can't just you can't build something and then go, oh, right, we'll stick some security on at the end. that you can't do that. You've got to have security starting from the beginning as a core requirement. And that makes sense. For example, a military satellite network, of course, that comes from the get-go, but something perhaps developed by a university that is an afterthought because it's not really the main game for the objective of that mission. So I think part of this is bringing the security elements towards, become more basic requirements. And, I guess standardisation is always helpful in that regard as well. So.
There's certainly experiments, we can do research and put things up there and test the cyber resilience of things. We do a lot in Australia of designing it on a bit of paper and putting it on a PowerPoint slide, but to kind of get back to the space safety piece, verification and validation is really important. Mm-hmm. And you can only really tell whether it's how something works with all of those emergent properties that you get when it's up there doing stuff. So I think we need good cybersecurity, but we need to test it, and I think that's where industry and academia and government can work together.
Mm. So good lead into my next topic of discussion. And let's go a little bit technical. Let's assume we've been a bit doom and gloom, I feel. Business cases and closings, destroying space. Yeah. But let's assume that's all rosy. What tech are we seeing already or emerging that's going to be a game changer because of this rush to do mega constellations? And think about kind of four things on the ground. What's changing on the ground? What's changing in the use of spectrum? Of course, what's changing in space segment and how to get it there? And if we did have this amazing space internet, what value-added services could be developed to make use of that? Any thoughts?
I'll have a go. So this is a plug for a SpaceLink, of course. So we think optical communications are a game changer. So every single conference we go to, everyone puts up PowerPoints and the curves all bend up to the right, particularly in terms of bandwidth, but the price one falls down. So we're almost at the bottom of the curve of what we can do with RF. We just can't squeeze that much more out of RF, and God stopped making it a while ago. There's just no more RF to be had. And that's one of the reasons why we're getting so many of these mega LEO constellations. They're trying to do high frequency reuse by getting stuff closer and closer to the ground. Optical does tend to remove some of that pressure. And certainly when we spoke to the FCC about it, they were very supportive because, all of a sudden, we're not consuming RF, we're moving to optical, and the price points per megabit moved is just that much better. So I think that's probably a game changer. The second one is probably agile development on cloud environments. I think that's going to be hugely beneficial. That coupled with software-defined payloads is going to give a lot of flexibility. And one thing I've learned over the last sort of 20-odd years of working in space is what you think you're designing for isn't what you end up with. You always go, damn it, we should have done that. We should have had, every time we've put in flexibility, which is a cost up front, always later on we've gone, oh, that was good, we're glad we did that. So it's really hard because if you look at a discounted cash flow model, right, you're spending all this money up front and who cares what happens in 10 years' time? Well, usually we do find it does pay off. So getting the flexibility there, and with software-defined stuff, you get it for free. So that's why I think it's a game changer.
So do we have both on the optical and the software-defined, is that ready to go today, or is there more development to happen?
Yep, it's in the factory now. Yep. They're flying this stuff. It's not new anymore. So maybe I didn't answer your question.
Yeah,
no, that's right.
I would echo a lot of those comments. So we have got reconfigurable satellites up there flying around just now, and the next software development's ready to go, and we can have new sensors doing new things, or we can reconfigure the spacecraft to go from a maritime surveillance mode to space domain surveillance mode. It was discussed earlier, mesh networks of satellites, so they don't need to go from the ground to space and ground. They can intelligently figure out, what are our targets, as in, what do you want to look at or listen to, and refine that knowledge between them as a enterprise in space. So, getting more data down quickly via optical is really, really useful, but more intelligently figuring out what data you want to actually communicate is another big piece of that onboard processing. So, for example, there's not much point of just downloading pictures of clouds if you're interested in coastline. If you're interested in just the shape of the coastline, do you need the whole picture, or can you have a schmancy algorithm that goes, yep, that's the shape, and then you've got a line that you need to.
Will that be running on board?
that will be running on board. I think, we can get a little carried away and go, yeah, it's all going to get done on board. I think, really intelligent ways of integrating everything across the ground, the space, and the user segment, using, big computational facilities on the ground, but also straight to people's PAMs, and connecting with the customer as well. So, what information do they need? We're really good at collecting information and then shoving it on the customer and go, sift through the bargain bucket and see what you want. A lot more pull from the customer of, I really, really want to know a lot more about what's happening right there, right now. And that's where those mega constellation concepts can add value.
So Lynn, are we creating tools to help the customer do that for themselves, or is the analytics being done and then the product being delivered to a customer, or a bit of both?
Both. Yeah. So I was really I can talk about the data and AI piece if you want, but I was really interested to talk about the software-defined and ground infrastructure needs. So I completely agree with you, Glenn. The need for software-defined everything, from the payload to the ground infrastructure, having open, flexible architectures. I know, the mega constellations, a lot of, direct to consumer, but I think we're also in a sea change of transforming these technologies and the ground infrastructure for connectivity. So having highly open, flexible digital architectures, highly virtualized architectures, really from the ground to the satellite, creates tremendous flexibility in capability, the ability to have blended transport, to bring in other connectivity like 5G, and really to be able to roam across capabilities from a connectivity perspective, to be able to roam across, really you should be able to roam across capabilities across Constellation and across providers. So moving to that digital transformation of the architecture from space to ground is I think we're underway in that transformation in the industry, but I think that's a really significant one.
So for that, do we need more software people? Or more space people, or both?
Both. Space software people.
Space software people?
Space
Do
software
such things
people.
exist?
Software is always a driver, but it's also the right sort of software as well. So once you get into embedded software and things like that, finding those skill sets is really hard. And then, finding the whole ecosystem, if we want to use that word, of skill sets to drive that whole system forward is probably the biggest thing to solve in Australia just now. And it's where, we all need to work together to, I can put on some education programs, but if there's not clear pathways to jobs and careers, then, we're not going to have those people available to be able to do that sort of work. And I think in Australia right now, most people have come into space through weird and wonderful routes. I came here from Scotland and did, helicopters and everything else, and then eventually arrived in space. I think, from today forward, we really need to look at what is that direct career path so that all of those skills are available, and we've not really solved that yet.
But is that another way of saying we should make software, I'm thinking about the software engineer problem, we should make space look more like stuff on the ground, just sexier, right?
Yep.
So if somebody that can do CI/CD development on cloud infrastructure, what's the difference between doing it in one of Lynn's data centers or doing it on orbit, right? It's just sexier on orbit. So we see that as a way to draw more skills in, and as well as provide standardization as well as scalability of it, so you can spin up more services virtually. So we think that's probably the way we're going to solve that one. But
yeah, that will work, but there are still very specific niche skills about how do you get the actual hardware to speak to the software, and that is one of the main benefits of mega constellations, is that you create a lot of satellites and you need a lot more people to help build and sustain and maintain and grow that, so you will have those skills. You will have multiple jobs rather than everyone needs this one person for that part of the development cycle and then they don't need them anymore. Well, you're not going to have 1,000 people waiting to pick that job up. So that is one of the best things about mega constellations as far as building the sector goes is that you're going to have that throughput, you're going to have lots of launches, you can have lots of innovation, and you're going to be able to iterate and take version 1.0 down and put version 2.0 up and drive things. So it's not, a 5, 10, 20, 30-year cycle from conception to delivery.
And it drives costs down continually just because of the ability to do repeatable work. Yeah. Yep.
It's interesting how every space conversation comes back to skills and lack of skills. Out of all the tech we discussed then, it feels like it all already exists, and now we're just trying to get it up as fast as possible and put it in the hands of people that can use it as fast as possible. Or is there something I'm missing about mega constellations?
I think the Lego blocks exist. We have to stick the Lego blocks to build them into something, right? I mean, we're not going to go, when you build a computer network, there's all this new stuff being done on the ground. You don't go and build yourself your own Ethernet switch. You don't go and build your own, processing blade. You don't do that. You put them together in a different way. And I think that's where an easier and frankly better and path for innovation is for Australia, right? But at the end, that comes back to the brain power. So your point was it's not about the boxes again, and I say it's about the applications, but maybe you're right, it's really about the people. And so we really should be, as an industry, be more focused on development of our workforce, perhaps more than we are. We are a little.
The operations part as well is really important. We focus on the technology and putting it together and getting it up there, and we maybe need some propulsion and we need some fancy sensors and algorithms to figure out where things are going to be. But how do you operate these things 24/7, 365 days a year? Takes it's hard to operate spacecraft currently when you've only got a couple of them. If you're dealing with 10,000 spacecraft, then you need a really schmick operations structure where you can find the needles in the haystack when something's out of pattern of life. It's not behaving as you would expect. How do you identify that and do something about it before that, that's a bit odd, turns to, we've lost the spacecraft. So there's been examples recently where I think it was a Malaysian satellite just started spinning out of control because they had a thruster fire. What could have been done to try and identify that before it was really, really obvious that something was wrong? We've not really looked at that in a lot of detail, largely because we've not had the need to. We don't have a lot of spacecraft in orbit just now.
But it does also give rise to an interoperability issue as well, right? So, again, if you think about, are the constellations working together, or are they competitors? And are the clients then expected to get, a bespoke technology to talk to that, or is it going to flourish when you have a device that can go across all of the constellations? So these are sorts of questions that, we don't know the answers to yet. But I think, again, this is another question that's coming up in terms of, involvement in the Artemis program. Interoperability sits there as one of the principles of cooperation. It's not something that has been there before in space technology, but it's something, again, to think about. So if it's interoperable, it's more likely that you're going to have more end users in ways that you can't currently predict right now.
So
actually, I've got an interest. Oh, sorry, Morris.
It's a really good point from space safety as well. So if you've got a commercial company that's got 20,000 satellites up there, operating them, and then all of a sudden your business model turns out to not be what you thought it was, and you go out of business, and they close the doors and disappear. Who operates that? What do we do? What are those mechanisms? So there's a lot of technical stuff in there, a lot of operations stuff, but there's also a lot of business and governance, and who carries the can for that, and we've not touched on that. If they're interoperable and you can get another someone else that does this sort of thing to come in and go, okay, quick, read of the manual, let's have a go and drive these things, and that's great. I don't think that would currently be very possible or feasible in the current environment.
So I've got an interesting anecdote on the interoperability piece. So one of the reasons we chose optical heads for our optical communications for our SpaceLink program was because the Space Development Agency in the US went and they put out a standard. They said we're going to do a mesh network of LEO, they call it PLEO, proliferated LEO satellites. They're going to make it all optical. They said so that lots of vendors produce these optical heads. We're going to publish a standard. So they knocked up a standard and published it. And so we said, oh, we're going to use that standard because now we can get cheap optical heads, and we know multiple vendors are going to use it. So that's great. Then we went and saw the Space Development Agency, and I went and met with them when I was in Washington a few weeks back. And I went to the meeting with some trepidation because, they're building a network for hauling data around for the government, and we're sort of saying, yeah, that's what we're going to do, but we're going to do it in MEO. And I went to them thinking, do they think we're going to try and eat their lunch? What they actually said was, thank God you guys are here. We love the idea that there's going to be interoperability. What they wanted to do was set standards and do a proof of concept, and they want commercial and other government organisations to come in, use those standards and interoperate. So that was a really strong and clear story from the US government, which frankly I wasn't expecting. And to follow up on Melrose's point, we sort of said, so what's going to happen after SDA Tranche 0 and Tranche 1 are done? Is it going to go to the US Space Force? And they said no. They said it's a proof of concept demo. They're going to mothball the damn thing, right?
Right.
So they said, well, it's not a program of record. The US, Space Force or whatever, they're sort of like, well, if you're not going to provide training, you're not going to supply sustainment, you're not going to do all this, what are we going to do with it? They can't use it for the warfighter, right? So it's a really interesting case study of this is where government's done a really good thing, set a standard, done a proof of concept, and tried to kick off industrial development. So I think it's a great model.
So for my last point, Lynn, you had a good quote when Austrade did a piece on you recently. Australia's commercial space industry is just starting out. There's an opportunity to disrupt old models using speed and agility and build a new paradigm. Technology transformation is forcing momentous change. So for the last discussion point, and I think you've all left a lot of nice hooks so far, is what's Australia's role in managing the challenge of mega constellations across coming up with solutions for customers, the space environment, and then also the technology piece? Maybe Lynn, what are your thoughts?
So my mind first immediately goes to the challenge around space domain awareness, space situational awareness. There's tremendous capability in the Australian space industry to bring to bear. So I see Australia absolutely as a leader in that area. I think that would be, it's tremendously needed as we look at the challenges related to mega constellations. Back to space traffic management, I'm just very passionate about that whole area. I know it's an incredibly complex mission set, and again, it can't be run just by US, by Department of Commerce, wherever this ends up transitioning to. It really has to be an international endeavor. It needs international leadership, and I think that Australia is absolutely has a leadership role in this. So I think that is a really critical area. But
so both from the technology and the actual governance side.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think there is this. You can really take it anywhere. So there's the absolute essentials. We need leaders, international leaders. I think there's a really interesting dynamic when you look at it from a Five Eye perspective as well, and the capability that can be brought to bear from a Five Eye perspective as it relates to this, when you look at it in terms of national security and defense and government needs. But really, it's wide open. So whether it's leading in SSA, STM, or managing the tremendous amount of data and taking that to industry and leading in that area, I think it's really wide open. But there's an absolute need for managing what is about to be an incredibly dynamic LEO regime.
Melissa, your voice is heard internationally. Is everyone listening to Australia when we speak?
I think they are, because I think we are regarded as being a trusted voice. So insofar as anyone is listening to anyone at all, I want to be positive and say...
It's a big assumption, I suppose.
Yeah, yes, up to a point. I think if anyone, we have an opportunity, put it that way. I do think we are a trusted voice, and I think we need to really, step into and own that role. And I think, to add to what Lynn said, and I agree with everything, is also just the role that we play in the region. So, if you think about, we always think about satellites in terms of footprints and those sorts of things. We have an obligation to the region as well to be a responsible actor globally and also in the region. So, really interesting dynamics. We think about our continent, but then think about the seas that we're surrounded by, and we know that one of the advantages of LEO communication is that it doesn't require you to have a ground station. So there's all sorts of opportunities there as well. So absolutely, we need to just own that role that we have, keep the conversations going.
Okay. So we have a big role to play, Glenn. What are we going to do?
Yeah, so look, expansion on the two previous points already made. So, just to think about space domain awareness, if you think about it, the US can see the northern and western hemispheres, and Australia can see the southern and eastern hemispheres. So together in partnership, we can sort of see the whole world, right? So that's one of the reasons why Australia, since 1985-ish, has been doing space domain awareness, because you get the full global picture, and it's a global problem. So I think we could build on that existing partnership. Also, there's, to plug EOS a bit, there's some unique capabilities locally. So there's space domain awareness is made up of a bunch of different capabilities. Some things can see lots of things at once in lower fidelity. Some things can see very few things, like one thing at once, but in very high fidelity and do orbit determination and things. So there's a mix of capabilities there that come together, and Australia's in a really unique place to contribute to building that UDL, the data library, that enables that first situational awareness there. So the second piece is that the ACMA, obviously takes a lot of pride in its international reputation, and has done a great job for Australia in that our voice is taken very seriously. Now, as a company trying to file locally, the ACMA can be a bit frustrating. They're not as forward-leaning as some other administrations, but that swings and roundabouts. Now we're a very respected country in terms of the way that we operate in space, and I think now's the time to capitalise on that and make our voice heard sort of fairly strongly, I think.
Glenn, I've got to ask, what did the Space Development Agency folk think when you wandered in a few weeks ago and said g'day and started talking in your Aussie accent?
They were very friendly, because we're great partners with the US. And frankly, SpaceLink's an American company, right? So we're American when we want to be. And on the other side of the coin, we're Australia, right? So, yeah.
Sorry, Glenn, put you on the spot. Are you giving me the look, James? Is that why you're there? Not yet. Okay. Melrose, and then can we throw to the floor for any questions? Cool. Melrose.
So,
what's Australia's role? What are we going to do?
So on the space domain awareness piece, because that's what I research, space surveillance without any action isn't space domain awareness. You need to be able to do something to change that outcome. So I always say space domain awareness starts at home. You will never know more about the objects you launch into orbit than when you're holding them in your hands. So we need to demonstrate to the world how to do mega constellations well and properly. We need to be launching high-quality spacecraft that have control, that have a plan. We have pretty much a blank page here. We don't need to have a completely separate launch service aspect and a satellite and a user. Why are we launching possibly hundreds of satellites on a single launch without knowing whether those are dead on arrival or not? We could solve that problem, and it requires people to decide to do that. So if there's a problem, stop it as early as you can in the piece. On the space domain awareness aspect, there's the civilian space traffic management piece of everyone's trying to be nice and friendly and stop things crashing into each other. So we need sensors on the ground. Spacecraft saying where they are is another important piece. And to get back to ACMA, we're only allowed to broadcast over Australia, so we can't have a beacon or ping when we're flying over the US or anything like that, so we can't use any passive RF technology or anything like that to say where they are. So we can, maybe try and solve some of those issues. The other aspect is the defense and kind of nefarious use of space. So how are we going to be able to combine all of these different sensors with all of the data analytics and machine learning and patterns of life and come up with new ways of being able to see that someone's actually interfered with that satellite, and that's why it's not behaving in the way we thought it was, or that's moved, and the reason it's moved is for these reasons that we're either comfortable with or we're not comfortable with, and then make a decision on what we should do about it. And that doesn't mean firing an ASAT up to deal with the threat. Often it just means, doing a little maneuver and getting out the way. So we need that whole of system approach and not just inherit the legacy stovepipes that our partners across the seas and oceans have developed. And yeah, I think
so there is a genuine opportunity for Australia with a fresh approach. Cool. Any questions from the floor? I think I saw the mic go around. Here's one over here. Can you introduce yourself and say where you're from?
From Constellation Technology. One of the key things we need for the development of space sector is establishment of a strong collaboration between academia and industry, wherein industrial players can leverage the academic expertise in devising practical solutions, particularly in areas such as cybersecurity, space domain awareness, etc. So my question here is directed to Melrose. Being part of an academic research group, can you comment upon the challenges faced by academia in reaching out to industries, and also finding suitable industrial platform where you can actually implement your research findings?
That's a very good question, Ram. We've actually been very lucky and fortunate. So we've actually partnered with Clearbox. I promise this wasn't a Dorothy Dixon question. To a partner on our passive RF research and combine that with our own optical work. So we've actually found that there is a lot of appetite in Australia to partner and to try and push these things forward. I guess, the challenge is that, there's only so much you can do with so much funding that you have. And I think finding that model where academia can really ask those big questions and try the sorts of things that industry can't do. And I think we need to be, really aware of where universities are really, really strong in the sort of role that we can fill in Australia. And it's not being industry light or whatever. It's being that, asking those questions, doing that rigorous work, and making sure that we contribute to the conversation and we demonstrate what the value and quality is here. And then industry having that pathway to grab what we're doing and through support, but also the skill base internally to take that research and turn it into a commercial product. There is very few pathways for us to get lots and lots of money to hire really amazing software engineers and take that bit of research software and turn it into a commercial thing that will work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that's where the commercial element comes in, because there's a lot of value to industry to do that. For us, we're like, well, can you write a paper on that? Well, no. We found that we've had to take on quite a big chunk of that role ourselves because there has been a bit of a vacuum, but that is starting to change. And, there's a lot of people in the room here today that can really help with that journey.
Melissa, what about you? How does industry engage with you? Should we be engaging with you?
Oh, look, absolutely. And we do. We engage with industry all the time. I don't think I would be even, working in space law if it wasn't for industry. And we exist to essentially assist and support and serve industry. The problem that we have is the lack of funding of, what we would call once upon a time, blue sky research. And the same thing would apply to SIAA, right? So, there's very much a focus on, industry and commercialisation, and that's absolutely right. But remember that that's here on the spectrum, okay? So to get to that point, we have to do a lot of fundamental blue sky work that is probably, for the most part, common good. It's a public good. It's available to everybody. So, the research that I do, it becomes a public good. It's available to everybody, and therefore, because it's available to everybody, nobody wants to fund it. So, it's a catch-22. It's not that academia doesn't want to work with industry, they do, but because of our own internal funding models and metrics, it's actually quite difficult. So I think there's a desire to work together, but a lack of understanding that the mechanisms have to actually fit together. And there's a lot of work that government still has to do in funding that fundamental research to get to the point where we can do all of the amazing stuff. So I think just focusing on that sort of, the last 5% and saying, well, make it commercialisable, really understands all of the backroom stuff. And I think we've forgotten that we need to fund that to get to that bit there.
So slightly different angle on that note. So EOS is quite a big, we're quite close to academia. So of the 500 odd staff, we've got a couple of dozen PhDs there. And a lot of them are in very specialised fields. We're laser physicists, where do you find those folks? We've found we've actually had a lot of difficulty sourcing the right skills base to conduct our programs. And so we have taken the step to fund some academic chairs. So we fund an academic chair in South Australia in advanced photonics. And we do one in Queensland for advanced electromagnetics, whatever that is, right? So we're trying to generate the grad students and graduates that we can use, and so that's the sort of virtuous cycle we're trying to spin up at the moment. The question on intellectual property, so that's a big one for us. So with collaborative type engagements, we really care about where the IP ends up, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing we're really selling. It's not about the boxes, it's about the brains and the IP. So we're looking for models where we can basically preserve the IP, and for us that means probably not publishing, not patenting, and patenting, whatever the word is. So we keep it in-house largely. So that's not particularly great in terms of collaboration, but that's sort of where we've ended up, just in terms of how best to protect that IP.
One thing, and maybe just add to the end of Melissa's comment, is that we've talked about trying to inspire the youth and dinosaurs in space. This will come as a big shock to everyone. Kids aren't that interested in critical infrastructure. That's not what that isn't what has inspired them. It's about new knowledge, exploration, making a really big difference to the world. And if we're all just thinking about how can we do our grifting to take our make some sales and generate some cash and jobs and growth, which is obviously very important, you're not going to inspire the youth of tomorrow. And we can't lose sight of space and science are the same thing. From the very first moment anyone looked up, they're like, what is that? And that's driven everything that we've seen from, Industrial Revolution all the way through. And we need to get back to that value proposition of, why do we do space? Because we find out things we didn't know before, and it adds value. Maybe not tomorrow, but, we need to support our fundamental research as well.
Perfect. I think I got a nod. Yes. With that sense of wonderment, please thank our panel for sharing with us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. And Melrose will drum that idealism out of you in no time at all. We're going to go to lunch now, but before that, 2 announcements from me. We've had a request to do a Women in Space photo on the stage. So if you'd like to be part of that, Catherine, I'm going to dob you in to do the wrangling, but we'll do that right here on the stage as soon as we break for lunch. Secondly, if you're a member of the SIAA board or advisory council or a life member, If you can at some stage during the lunch break find the photographer to take your portrait in front of the media wall, that would be fantastic. For the rest of you who are camera shy or just hungry, we'll see you back here at 2:30 for the Japanese ambassador's speech. So I look forward to having you back in the room by then. Thank you.